Hey, Breakfast Club viewers. Welcome to episode 53, for which we are back with returning super popular Breakfast Club guest, Senior Ornithology and Mammalogy Collections Manager, Moe Flannery. Hey, Moe.
Good morning.
Good morning. And I am gonna embarrass Moe for a second and just say that I was thrilled when she showed up for yesterday's live stream test in a bathrobe. And I was like, this is exactly the vibe I have been wanting this show to hit for like months and months and months. So I'm a little disappointed with what you're wearing today, but I am glad that you're here. So
sorry.
Yeah, it's not too late to change.
My fuzzy blue bathrobe.
Yeah. I mean, it just, that's like that's all I want life to be these days. So I found it comforting. And let's see, so last time you were here, you gave us this really awesome behind the scenes collections tour of the ornithology and mammalogy collections at the Academy. And this time you're actually kind of taking us out of the building and into the field for some work that may surprise some people. Can you tell us just like an overview what we'll be talking about today?
Yeah, so today we're going to talk about primarily our large whale response at the Academy, but kind of our marine mammal stranding response in general. So out in the field working on dead marine mammals.
Right. Okay. And that brings up a good reminder, which is that audiences, just a note that this presentation will contain some imagery of whale necropsies. I have that word's hard for me. Yeah. And so it may be a little upsetting for some folks, and especially if you have kids watching or really young kids, that's something you might want to be mindful of. But this is going to be an amazing presentation. We're going to go a little longer than usual because it's really in depth. But you can ask questions at any point. Just leave them in the comments if you're watching on Facebook or the YouTube chat box. And then we'll loop back at the end and ask as many of them as we can. So this is a super fascinating topic, and I'm excited to get started. So Moe, I'm going to throw your slides up on screen if you want to switch into present mode.
Great.
Looks perfect. Okay, I will get out of here and see you at the end. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you, everyone, for coming today. So I will be using the pointer a little bit, and I just want to introduce you to that because it can be not as easy to see, but right now just the regular pointers above my name. So I'm Moe Flannery. I've been at the Academy for 19 years. I work on birds and mammals, and I take care of our bird and mammal collection. So at the Academy, we have 46 million specimens that make up the entire research collection. That's 8 departments, ranging from anthropology to herpetology to birds and mammals. And in birds and mammals, we have 100,000 bird specimens, 32,000 mammal specimens, and 11,000 eggs and nests. And our specimens are a whole bunch of different types of specimens, but they also are a huge range of sizes. So I take care of things like teeny tiny hummingbird eggs that are about the size of Tic Tacs, to this large blue whale skeleton that we have hanging over the main floor in the Giants of Land NC exhibit currently. So very diverse types of specimens and sizes. But in general, I like to think of myself as a librarian, but instead of taking care of books and lending out books and having visitors come in and look at books, I'm dealing with specimens, scientific research specimens. So we have specimens that are available to researchers from all over the world. They can come into the museum, or I can send them out on loan. They can study morphology, geographic variation, individual variation. Some people do archaeology studies and bring in bones to compare to bones in our collection. People can also use our specimen for references of past situations on Earth to current, and hopefully for future too. So they can look at climate change and the environmental contaminants, what was in the water in the early 1900s in a bird specimen. Is there mercury there versus birds that are collected today? Are they finding higher levels of mercury or lower levels of mercury? Things like that. And then we don't know what technologies will be used in the future. So that's why we keep the specimens. DNA and stable isotopes and CT scans were not developed when museums started hundreds of years ago. And now those types of research are used all the time with museum specimens. So our mammal collection is a fairly large marine mammal collection. So one of the largest marine mammal collections in a museum in the world, not the largest, but one of. But we do have the world's largest collection of California sea lion skulls, more than 3,000 skulls, and the world's largest collection of southern sea otters. So over 1,500 of those are cataloged. We probably have about 1,200 of them that are in the pipeline, about to be cataloged or hopefully cataloged sometime in the future. We have a little bit of a backlog of work to get done. And then we also have North America's largest collection of Guadalupe fur seals with more than 250 specimens. And 250 doesn't sound like a lot, but this is a species that primarily was distributed around Mexico, the island of Guadalupe off of Mexico, and is slowly moving back into their, what we think might have been their historic range and coming up more frequently in our area. So about 5 years ago, we only had 27 Guadalupe fur seal specimens, and now we have more than 250. So it's a small collection, but it's a very important collection. So our marine mammal holdings represent 49 species. There are all sorts of different types of materials. And over the decades, more than 185 researchers have published more than 70 scientific papers based on the specimens in our collection. So when we go out to work on a dead marine mammal in the field, we do collect specimens to archive in the collection in perpetuity. So we'll collect things like bones, depending on the animal. We might collect a complete skeleton if it's a small enough animal, or we might just collect a skull. We collect baleen from baleen whales. That's this large black thing that's a rack of baleen. So those are individual baleen plates. And baleen can be used in some really interesting studies where you can drill out tiny little pieces of the baleen, and it tells you what the animal, where the animal was, stable isotopes. But then also researchers have looked at hormones. They can see when females have been pregnant and when they've had calves. They can look at contaminants. It's really interesting work. We collect tissues like muscle and skin samples and liver samples for use in genetic studies in the future. Blubber from whales goes into our collection as well, and that can be used for contaminant studies. And then whales have something called an earplug, which is basically like our ear wax. It builds up within their ear canal, but because they don't have a very large opening to the outside world, it stays in their ear canal. So researchers can study earwax, the earplug, and they can age the animal, count the different rings of earwax, the same as on a tree. And they can also do chemical analysis of the earplug, and that can tell them similar things to what you would find in baleen, hormones and stable isotopes and things. So our collection was really primarily built by one field researcher. He was a volunteer field associate with us from 1953 until his death in 2017. This is Raymond Bones Bandar. He was an amazing man who collected more than 6,000 skulls and had them all set up in his home as a museum that he shared with many, many people. He did collect under our permits because marine mammals are protected. Once they were protected, Ray collected for the museum. So he was not collecting for himself. That is not legal. He was collecting for us. And in this picture, he is holding a pelvic bone of a blue whale that I will show you later. And he was always really happy when he found the pelvic bone because it's an easy bone to take home, or take to the collection when you're out working on a whale because it's small and manageable, but it's one of the hardest bones to find in a whale's body because it just kind of floats back there. So marine mammals are protected under the Marine Mammal Protection Act, which started in 1972. That covers all marine mammals. So it's illegal for anyone without authorization to have marine mammal parts, even if you find them on the beach. You cannot prove that you didn't harm that animal to get that part. So as a museum, we are authorized under the National Marine Fisheries Service with a stranding agreement to collect marine mammal parts and to collect data from marine mammals and to store those parts. We also have permission to work under an endangered species permit, because not only are some animals endangered, they're also marine mammal protected. So some of the endangered species that we see in the San Francisco Bay Area are southern sea otter, which is a threatened species. The Guadalupe fur seal is also a threatened species. Blue whale, fin whale, humpback, and sperm whale are endangered species. So we are authorized under that permit to work on those animals. So we're part of a Marine Mammal Stranding Network. This is a national network in the United States that is along all of the coasts of the US, including Alaska and Hawaii. There's one national coordinator and 6 regional coordinators, but there are 5 geographic regions. California is in the West Coast region. We are together with Washington and Oregon. So we all work together along the coast and communicate with each other, which is really helpful. So we know what's happening with animals in California, same as Oregon and Washington, or is it different? There are about 120 organizations in the Stranding Network nationwide, and about 20 of them in California. So this is the area that Cal Academy covers, my team, my very small team. We cover about 400 miles of coast and bay shoreline. You can see all those squiggly yellow lines into the San Francisco Bay. Sometimes we do get California sea lions way up in Solano County in the river. But basically we cover from Año Nuevo Island in the south all the way up to Rockport or Westport in Mendocino County in the north. And we respond to any dead marine mammal that washes up in that area. At the same time, overlaid over us is the Marine Mammal Center, which is found in Sausalito. They respond to live marine mammals. So live marine mammals that are in distress, need some medical attention along the same area of California. So not only do we respond to small dead marine mammals within our response range, and the Marine Mammal Center rehabs things like California sea lions and harbor seals and Guadalupe fur seals, all the pinnipeds. We also collaboratively work together on several projects. So a large whale necropsy, and necropsy is basically an autopsy, but instead of the word autopsy, which is what we use for humans, the animal autopsy word is necropsy. So you'll hear that come up again. But a large whale necropsy, as you can see, requires a huge collaborative group of people. We usually have about 15 to 20 people work on any necropsy, especially if it's a large animal like this blue whale, which was over 80 feet long. And so we have the Cal Academy working with the Marine Mammal Center. We have a great collaboration in this area to work together to get the necropsy done. We generally have a very short window of time to do this work because the tides come in and out, and we can only access the animals when it's safe for us to be there when the tide is out. And so we generally only have about 3 to 4 hours at the most to do a necropsy. And so we really need a huge team of people with specialized skills to work on it. So it's great that the Marine Mammal Center will work with us. So we also work with the Marine Mammal Center on a few other projects, a small cetacean CT scan project. This is a harbor porpoise head CT scan. Those are the ears. We were looking at brain and nasal parasites in that project. And then we also archive specimens at the Academy from the Marine Mammal Center. So if an animal survives through rehab, they're generally released out into the wild. That's the main goal of the work that they do there. However, some animals are too sick and do not survive. And so they're involved in different things like cancer studies. If they have an unusual species, like just recently, there was a pygmy sperm whale that they responded to that died, and that is now coming to the California Academy of Sciences collection. And then any kind of interesting human interaction cases. So if the animal's entangled or was shot or something like that, we want to archive those in the scientific research collection so that researchers can use them in the future. So we do try and do a field necropsy whenever possible on a large whale. You can see from the outside of these whales, and you'll see throughout the presentation, that really when you look at an animal, it's not very obvious. Well, this one, that is not true because it's entangled, but in general, if a carcass washes up on the beach, there's no real physical sign of what happened to it. You really have to open it up and look inside and look for broken bones and look for bleeding tissue and look at the intestines and look for disease in order to really be able to say what might have happened to that animal. So we're always trying to figure out the cause of death. You know, was it a human interaction situation, which can include fisheries like entanglements, bycatch, was the animal caught in a net if it's a small one. Gear ingestion, did it ingest fishing net that was floating? Was it hit by a ship? That's one of the main causes of death in large whales, and so we have to find the evidence of that. And then we're also looking for any signs of disease. Okay, so this is a blue whale that washed up on Bean Hollow State Beach in Half Moon Bay in 2010. This was my first blue whale ever. She was, hold on a second, 79 feet long, and she had a midterm fetus in her when she washed on the shore. So this pancake on the right-hand side of the screen is actually the fetus. So it was about 17 feet long, and when they're born, blue whale young are 20 to 23 feet. So it was getting pretty close. How did that happen? How did the fetus end up on the beach? Well, when a large whale washes in, I'm going to point to these throat grooves. Baleen whales use throat grooves to feed. So when they take a big gulp of water, their throat expands out into this big balloon. They bring the water in, their tongue pushes the water out, and the krill and the other food stays in their mouth because the baleen acts as a filter. However, when a whale dies, those throat grooves turn into a big balloon. They fill up with decomposition gases. So sometimes the first report we receive of a dead whale is that it's floating off at sea, and when people take pictures, there's this big balloon in the front of it, kind of like a sail, but that's actually the throat grooves that have expanded because of the gas from decomposition. So when this blue whale, when she hit the beach, you can see it's a really rocky beach. All of the gases pushed her intestines and the fetus and some of her bones and her baleen out onto the beach. And so that's why the fetus was there. We probably would have found the fetus when we opened her up, but we had a really short period of time for this necropsy. So it was really helpful that the fetus was already on the beach. So we were able to collect specimens. This is the whale that Ray had that pelvic bone from, and we collected baleen. And then we also collected bones from the fetus as well, which is very unique. Not many collections have the fetal bones. So how did this whale die? That's the question, right? So here's the first gory picture. So what we want to do when we're doing the necropsy is we're looking for any signs of injury. So we're looking for broken bones. And in this situation, we found some broken bones, but we also found hemorrhaging. So I'm going to point out on the top of the picture on the right, you can see some nice muscle tissue that looks kind of like a steak that you would eat. That's a healthy muscle in the top. But then all of this black stuff this is someone from UC Santa Cruz. We often will collaborate with the Long Marine Lab as well for these necropsies. This is all hemorrhage tissue. So that hemorrhagic tissue tells us that the whale was alive when the injury happened. So the only thing that can really injure a 79-foot animal of this size to this extent and cause its death is a ship strike. So because we didn't witness this ship strike, we can't say confirmed, but we say probable ship strike or injuries consistent with ship strike. And the fact that there's hemorrhaging tells us that the whale was alive when it was hit by the ship. I'll show you some pictures later of a whale draped over the front of a ship. Sometimes when ships come into San Francisco Bay, they will actually have whales that have gotten caught on the front of the boat. And, you know, they might argue that the whale was floating dead and then ended up on their ship, which I guess could happen. Although what we want to do is find out the evidence to provide the evidence that shows that the whale was actually alive and not dead when it ended up either getting hit by the ship or getting caught on the front of the ship. So by having hemorrhaging in the muscle tissue, that tells us it was alive. So we know that the cause of death was from the ship. So technically, if we know the ship, which we don't usually know, but if we do know the ship, then they could be fined or they could be, this would count as a take under the Marine Mammal Protection Act and under the Endangered Species Act. It might be an accidental take. They did not do it on purpose, but ships get certain numbers of takes or encounters that are allowable. But if they go over those, then that's when they're fined under the Marine Mammal Protection Act and the Endangered Species Act. So there's not often identification of the ship, but sometimes there is, and so that's why this information is important, whether it was alive or not. So here's another large whale that we worked on. This is a humpback whale that was in Pacifica in 2015. This is an adult female. She was 45 feet long. We did find some domoic acid levels in her urine. So domoic acid is a toxin that is found in quite a few marine mammals, especially California sea lions. They have a large problem with domoic acid toxicity. But because not that much is known about large whales, we don't actually know whether the domoic acid that was found in her urine had anything to do with her death. So that was one factor, but we don't know what a high level of domoic acid is in a large whale. So that's a study that maybe a graduate student could do in the future with samples that we've stored and that other stranding network organizations have stored. Although with this whale, we did figure out what was the cause of death. So here's a video of what we look for. So these are the lateral processes of the vertebrae that are broken. You can see I'm kind of wiggling, going along and wiggling them. That was at least 4 vertebrae that were broken. And the one on the end, the last one that I touched, was secure. So that tells us that that animal suffered an injury. It was hit by a ship and the bones were broken. Their bones don't break for any other reason. So that's why we have to really get in there, because on the outside of the animal, if I go back, you can see, you can't really see that, oh, it has broken bones and it's fine. But you really have to get in there and get those bones, and you have to clear it off so that you can actually move them around to see. Okay. So the next one, this is a fin whale. So one thing that happens in San Francisco Bay is sometimes whales do, like I said, they'll come in on ships or they'll float into San Francisco Bay. So this was first found near a pier in Alameda. It's a subadult fin whale. And when a whale is in the bay, it actually becomes a shipping hazard, a small craft hazard or large craft hazard. What they don't want in San Francisco Bay is some 52-foot animal floating along in the water that, you know, someone in their sailboat could run into and get hurt. And so the Army Corps of Engineers and sometimes the Coast Guard will actually tow whales, but we don't want them to just tow them out and let them go, because we want to learn from them. We want to be able to figure out what happened to the whale. So we have an agreement with California State Parks on Angel Island. There's an inaccessible beach that's only accessible by boat that has a nice place to tie off a whale carcass. So the crew will tow the whale to Angel Island, tie it off to the beach, and then we bring a necropsy team out to the island. And this was a confirmed ship strike. I think it had actually been seen coming in on the bow of a ship and then coming off as it turned into the bay. But what you can see, and this is kind of a clue that we look for as necropsy specialists, are an area where the skin is kind of coming off like this. It's called sloughing off, kind of on the side of this animal. That's an area that we would look at first. So the skin falls off of the areas that could potentially have the injury first before other parts. So although you can't see any broken bones, or even there might be a little bit of bleeding there, but generally that's just from scavenging by birds and things. But we might start there and look in there. So there are some clues that we can look for. Here's another blue whale. This one was in Daly City. It was a little bit smaller. It was 64 feet, a juvenile male. And this one actually had some injuries, although they were hard to see because we think he was laying on the side that had more of the injuries. So we couldn't actually get to everything. But he did also have a fractured skull. And there's not much that can fracture a skull. But this slide, I think, gives you a really good view of how big these animals are and how many people we really need to do this work, why it's a collaborative effort on everyone's part. Here's a whale floating in San Francisco Bay. We were not able to do the necropsy, unfortunately, so it was floating in the bay. Sometimes that happens, even though we had the carcass and then it was brought to Angel Island. That particular month, January of 2017, it was so stormy and so rainy and the weather was so bad that we could never get back out to the island soon enough. So as you can see, when it first washed in, it's very fresh and very, it's pristine. We like to work on fresh animals. The tissues from fresh animals are much more useful in scientific studies. You can get a lot more information. There's no decomposition to take into mind, and decomposition also changes a lot of the cellular makeup of tissues. So a fresh animal is really the best, but by the time we were able to get out to Angel Island, it had been very decomposed, and so we were not really able to definitively say whether or not this was a ship strike, but we do presume it was because of where it ended up in San Francisco Bay. And then this one, it's not my favorite because it's not really right to have a favorite dead whale, but it was the most interesting case I think that probably any of us have ever worked on. This was an 80-foot blue whale on Agate Beach in Bolinas. And this whale had more internal injuries than we've seen on any other animal. So we opened up the ribs, which are right along here. And you can see the tissue is kind of all stringy and decomposed, and more so here than in other areas. So that tells us that there definitely was injury there. But I think we looked at 19 ribs and 17 of them were broken. And then same thing with the vertebrae. We looked at a lot of vertebrae and most of them were broken. She even had broken bones in her flipper and on her skull. So this was a very serious injury that this whale suffered. And again, there was hemorrhaging, so it tells us that the whale was alive when it happened. One more. So this one actually shows you, this is the Port of Oakland, and you can see this is a ship. Those are the numbers that kind of indicate how high it is in the water. And this draped over the front is a fin whale. And we do see that occasionally. So these ships have a big bulb on the front. I'm not 100% sure what it's for, but that is where the whales sometimes get caught hanging over the bulb of the ship. So this one was towed to Angel Island, and we got a team out there to do a necropsy. And actually, there happened to be a film crew from BBC who was doing work on large animal necropsies. I don't remember the name of the series, and they had a host with them. Her name was Joy. She was just a delight. So they came out with us and they filmed the necropsy. So if you can find it, you can go to BBC and PBS. I know it aired on PBS here in the US not that long ago. You can watch this episode of the whale necropsy on Angel Island, but it was really interesting to have a film crew there. When we first started the necropsy, we were looking at the area where the animal was draped over the boat, and there was an obvious mark of like a rust mark on the side of the carcass where it had been hanging on the boat. But there weren't really that serious injuries under that area of the animal. However, when we kind of opened up this side of the animal, we did find where the vertebrae were actually severely dislocated. So they had been at a 90-degree angle to each other, which is not normal in a whale. So it had been a hard enough hit that the spinal cord had been severed, so probably an instant death. And the vertebrae were severely dislocated. So that told us that this was a ship strike. But that episode is very fun if you can find it. So, sorry, it's been a lot of information about ship-struck whales. So are these data useful? Like all this information that we're gaining on how a whale dies and if it's hit by a ship or not, is it useful? Well, it actually really is. So prior to 2013, San Francisco had very short shipping lanes. So if in this diagram on the right, the pink area, that is the shipping lane regulation prior to 2013. What that means is as a boat is going out of the bay or coming into San Francisco Bay, same thing in LA County in the bay, the Los Angeles Harbor. Once the ships are in the lane, they have to stay in a specific area. However, when they get to the end or the beginning, depending on which way they're going, they can kind of go wherever they want. So they're coming out of the bay, they hit the end, okay, we don't have to stay in the lane anymore, and they go all over. Well, the Farallon Islands are right here, right at the end of the shipping lane. So that meant when boats got to the Farallons, they could like go closer, go every which way. By having boats going every which way, the thinking is that there's more opportunities for them to encounter whales and to actually have a collision. And so based on data collected by the Marine Mammal Stranding Network on large whales and ship strikes, the Coast Guard and the shipping industry worked together to change the shipping lanes. So in 2013, they extended the lanes. That's what these green lines are. So that the boats have to stay in the lane for a much longer period of time before they can go off in any direction. We don't know whether or not that has had any positive effects on the number of large whales that are hit by ships. We're still gathering that data. It's a little bit hard to decipher because we've had more whales strand in the last 10 years than prior, well, not the last 10 years, the last like 5 or 6 years than the previous years in general, so prior to 2015, we would basically respond to about 4 or 5 dead whales each year. And that number has increased for various reasons up to like 15. Some years we've had 15 dead whales in a year. I'll get to some of that, of why it's increased in recent years. But in general, it's not just because of shipping. It's all sorts of entanglements in shipping and things like that. Sometimes when we're working on an animal on the beach, it shows trauma. So this one has some damage to its head, but no broken bones, and it's kind of badly decomposed. This is a 38-foot subadult humpback whale. Sometimes we just don't know what happened. And in this case, the answer was it had trauma, but there were no broken bones. So we had to just say unknown cause of death. When they come in really decomposed, that's sometimes the situation. Okay, so now we're moving on to some different types of cases. This is a gray whale. It's about 27 feet long. It's a juvenile male up in Portuguese Beach in Sonoma County. Although this carcass is badly decomposed, it only has a little bit of the black skin still left on there. Most of the skin has come off. You can see there's damage on the lower jaws missing, the tongue is missing, and we have some ideas of what might have caused that. But the evidence is actually here on the back of the body. So these lines that look like somebody took a rake and rubbed it along the animal, they're called rake marks, but they're not made by a rake. They're actually made by teeth, and generally teeth of other animals. So in this case, for a gray whale, a small gray whale, those rake marks are from orca. So orca feed on gray whales. So transient orcas in particular feed on marine mammals. And as gray whales are migrating up and down the coast, orcas kind of hang out, especially on the northward migration, which should be starting in the next month or so. Gray whales will start leaving Mexico, moms with their babies will start heading up to Alaska to feed in Alaska for the summer. And as they're passing Monterey Canyons in Monterey, the transient orcas are kind of hanging out, waiting for the moms and the calves to pass by. And then they will attack the calves, which are easier to attack than the moms. And sometimes they feed on them. Sometimes they just eat the tongues, which is why the lower jaw and the tongue are missing on this animal. And sometimes there are rake marks, but there are not signs that they consume the animal. So we don't know exactly what is happening, but we think that it's some of the orcas teaching their young how to hunt and using those gray whales going through Monterey Canyon on their migration as practice animals. So that's an orca kill. And then here is a juvenile bottlenose dolphin. So this one is 4 feet long. This is a newborn dolphin. You can see it has these lines through its body. Those are called fetal folds. And those are when the animal, when a fetus is in a uterus, they're in half. They are folded in half in these small cetaceans. And so you can see the fetal folds from being folded in half. But this young animal also has a lot of those rake marks that we saw on the orca, all over its flukes and all over its head. Now, those are not orca rake marks. They're kind of tighter together. They're smaller. What we think those are other bottlenose dolphin rake marks. So one thing that we see in bottlenose dolphins is something called infanticide, where bottlenose dolphins will kill or attack an infant of their species in order to possibly then mate with a female. So it's a way of getting somebody else's genetics out of the gene pool and spreading your own genes. So it doesn't just happen in bottlenose dolphin, that happens in other species as well. But what does happen in bottlenose dolphins that is unique is that sometimes they will also attack other species like harbor porpoises. So an adult harbor porpoise is about 4 or 5 feet long, the same size as a young bottlenose dolphin. And so over several years, we had many cases of what we call porpoiside. So instead of infanticide, so the bottlenose dolphins killing an infant of their same species, this is porpoiside, the bottlenose dolphins attacking and killing a porpoise, in this case, a harbor porpoise. And there was a paper published in 2011 of researchers that actually witnessed porpoiside events. Most of them were happening in Southern California for years, and then they moved north. So bottlenose dolphins and harbor porpoises have extended their ranges up the coast of California over the past several years. And so we did begin to see this type of activity in our area. And what they documented was a group of what they think were juvenile, teenager bottlenose dolphins, probably primarily males, would gang up on harbor porpoises that they came across. Maybe they were practicing, maybe they thought these harbor porpoises were young bottlenose dolphins. Maybe they were teaching others in their group how to manage a porpoise, but they would actually do organized attacks on harbor porpoises. Sometimes they'll grab them by the tail and throw them in the air. Sometimes two of the bottlenose dolphins will line up and just charge at the porpoise at the same time, thus breaking all of its ribs. We even had evidence that they were grabbing onto the porpoise's jaws and maybe holding them under the water. It's not a nice situation, and it's nature, that's what they do, but it makes you think twice about whether Flipper was really a nice dolphin. And, maybe dolphins aren't the sweetest of species out there, but, they don't eat the harbor porpoise. So it's really just a practice method, or who knows, maybe their testosterone levels are really high at that time of year. But we do see it fairly frequently. But you look at this carcass, it looks perfect. This harbor porpoise looks in perfect condition, but inside it's all beat up. All right, but not all of the marks on bottlenose dolphins are bad marks. And we learned this in a very interesting way. This is an interesting case. This was a almost 9-foot adult female from Pescadero in 2015. She's fairly decomposed. You can see most of her outer skin layers are gone, so she's not the nice black color that they're usually supposed to be. And she was wedged in the rock, so we couldn't do a full necropsy. But we were able to take pictures and collect her skull for the museum. But she had all of these rake marks all over her body. So initially we thought, oh, maybe she was attacked by an orca, because really orcas could attack large bottlenose dolphins, or maybe she was attacked by other bottlenose dolphins. We weren't really sure. But in this case, we had taken a picture of her dorsal fin. There are people all along the coast that take photos of live marine mammals and have a photo catalog to identify them. People working on bottlenose dolphins, harbor porpoises, gray whales, blue whales, humpback whales. There are catalogs all along the coast. So if you're out on the water and you take pictures of a humpback whale fluke, you should send it to Happy Whale, and they might be able to identify who that individual whale is. Same thing with these bottlenose dolphins. There are researchers that have been studying them for years. As you can see, this one had these nice, obvious nick marks in her dorsal fin. And so we sent off the photograph, and it was a match. And you can see the photo of her live, and you see those same nicks on her dorsal fin. So in this case, They'd given her a name. Her name was Falce. She was first identified by researchers in 1991. So remember, she stranded in July of 2015. So she was first identified by the researchers at Okeanis, which is the organization that studies bottlenose dolphins, down in San Diego in 91. And she was seen in the San Diego bite at that time. And they identified her in 1991 as an adult female. So she was at least 5 years old, because they reach adulthood at 5. So she was 5 years old in 91. She died in 2015. You can do the math, but she was an old bottlenose dolphin. But one of the things they were able to tell us, because they had watched her throughout her life, was that she had been in San Diego. She had moved to Monterey. And then in Monterey, she had become part of a nursery group, so a group of adult female bottlenose dolphins that helped to care for the young bottlenose dolphins. So, okay, dolphins are not all jerks, but maybe it's just the juvenile males that are, because of the porpoises. But in this case, the adult females formed this group, a collaborative group, to form a nursery group. And this particular group, according to the researcher there, is very mouthy with each other. So when they're hanging out with each other, they're kind of communicating and they're biting at each other. And that's why Falce had all of these rake marks all over her body. Was those were communication, connection, here I am, acts from other bottlenose dolphins in the nursery group. So it was not a negative situation in this case. And we learned a lot just from taking the picture and getting the identification and learning the history of the animal. And then that our information that she was found dead in July 2015 informs them as well of her life, her life expectancy, or the length of her life, and what the outcome was for her. And the fact that she's in the collection, her skull is now a specimen in the scientific research collection. That's an important piece of information, because it's not just a random bottlenose dolphin that was found on the beach, which, we do get those. This was a specific bottlenose dolphin that was identified at a certain time, and we know her. We have a rough estimate of her age, so that makes it a much more important scientific specimen. So there is a group here in the Bay Area. Now they're the Marine Mammal Center's Cetacean Field Research Team, formerly known as Golden Gate Cetacean Research. They identify and keep a catalog of harbor porpoises and bottlenose dolphins, gray whales, humpback whales that are in San Francisco Bay. It's a really interesting story, harbor porpoises and the use of San Francisco Bay, cetaceans in general, and the use of San Francisco Bay, because for many, many years, there were no harbor porpoises in San Francisco Bay, something like 60 years. The bay was very polluted. During World War II, there was a big metal submarine net across the front of the bay, down under the water, to keep out our enemies. That has since gone away. But the bay was not a hospitable place for harbor porpoises. It didn't offer them a lot of food. But recently, I think as recently as 2008, harbor porpoises started coming back into San Francisco Bay. So the Marine Mammal Center Cetacean Field Research Team stands on the Bay Bridge, on the Golden Gate Bridge, and takes photographs at certain time of day of all the harbor porpoises going in and out, and they can identify them by their distinguishing marks. And you can see this one is Golden Gate Cetacean Research number 21. She was found dead on Ocean Beach in August of 2011, but you can see she had some scars. This is the carcass on the necropsy table, and then those are her scars in real life. Here she is with a calf. She had been seen with a calf in 2010, and then here she is. This is the other side of her body on the table. You see the scar, and then you can see the scar on her body, and that is her in later on in 2010 without her calf. So she had the calf in February, and then in October she was alone without a calf, and then she died in August of 2011. So it's interesting to have the identification of the animal and for them to know what happened to her in their catalog. Moving on to other types of interactions that we see, interesting cases that we have. So sometimes animals ingest marine debris. You'll see sea lions with hooks in their mouths or in their stomachs. In this case, this is the first whale I ever worked on, March of 2008. It's a sperm whale, 51-foot adult male, and unfortunately, in his stomach was over 400 pounds of fishing net. So the hypothesis is that this is derelict fishing gear. The net is floating out at sea with a bunch of fish in it, and then the sperm whale is ingesting it, thinking that it's a food source. But because there was so much net in his digestive tract, he was not able to process his food. So the assumption is that he died because of this marine debris ingestion. So that would be considered a human interaction case because it's fisheries material that then is ingested into the whale. And then there are other fisheries interactions that are unfortunate and hopefully will change in the future. So this is a 25-foot orca, washed up, very fresh, in Mendocino County. It was, as you can see, entangled in crab fishing gear. We learned several things about this orca. Genetically, it is a transient from Alaska. So it had been up in Alaska and had come down to California. And it had 5 harbor seals in its stomach. So a stomach full of marine mammals. So transients eat marine mammals. That's not surprising to find. But this animal was in good, healthy condition and very robust, and having just fed, we think he was very healthy. But unfortunately, he got tangled up in this fishing gear and subsequently died of the stress of that fishing gear. So this animal is an important animal. I mean, orcas are not seen very often off of the California coast. They're more in Washington. They're resident orcas up in Washington. The residents eat salmon and other fish. The transients move along the coast. Those are the ones that eat marine mammals. And then there's another ecotype called the offshore orcas. So this one is a transient. It was 25 feet long, one of the largest orca that we have seen stranded. And we wanted to make sure that it was archived. And so a group of people from the Academy, from the Marine Mammal Center, from Humboldt State University, and from a small scientific organization in Fort Bragg called the Noyo Center for Marine Science, who were just in their infancy back then in 2015, we all worked together to collect all of the bones from this orca. The folks at the Noyo Center cleaned it off. And then several years later, I think it might have been 2019, I'm not sure of the date, they brought a group of people, interns, members of the community, and some specialists from Canada and Alaska, pictured here, to articulate this orca skeleton, so to put it together for public display. So now this orca is on display in Fort Bragg for people to see and to be able to experience the largest orca skeleton that's on display anywhere. It is technically a specimen of the California Academy of Sciences research collection, but it's on permanent loan to the Noyo Center. So if you're up in Fort Bragg, you should visit their visitor center when COVID things are open. You always have to check first, but on Main Street, they have the orca on display there. It's really a beautiful, beautiful specimen. So here's another entanglement in crab gear. So this is a gray whale. Gray whales are often entangled. So you can see the entanglement is through the mouth, and it goes around the body, and then it's really tightly wrapped around the flukes. And in this case, you can see that the entanglement is slowly destroying the tissue, and eventually it might amputate the fluke. There are several teams of people, trained professionals along the coast, both the West Coast and the East Coast, that respond to entangled whales. So if you see a live whale that's entangled, you can see gear on it, or it's stuck in one place and it's not going anywhere, you can report that to the entanglement network, and the large whale entanglement folks will go out. Often they'll attach a buoy to it first, just with a satellite tag to keep an eye on where it is. They'll get their team together in a small boat. These are trained professionals, so it's not something that just anyone can do. And then they'll go out and they will actually use specialized knives to cut the rope and free the entangled whales. And so that's a very important piece of work. The Marine Mammal Center has an entanglement team, and there's an entanglement team down further south along the coast as well. So they do very important work, but they don't always get the reports, and then we find these whales on the beach. So it is, you can identify the fishery. Most of the buoys have numbers, and the marine mammal folks and the fisheries folks, the crab fishermen in particular, are working together to try and solve this problem, because it is a problem, an increasing problem along the West Coast. Whale populations are increasing in number, and there are lots of crab fisheries along the West Coast, and fisheries folks they don't want to get a whale entangled in their gear. They lose their gear. They don't want to kill an animal. Nobody wants this to happen. So there are teams that are working together to try and develop solutions. You know, maybe it means fishing gear that doesn't have a rope. So some kind of robotic crab pots that they can raise up with a computer or something. But they're all working together to try to come up with a solution. And there have been more regulations. You may have experienced delays in the crab fishery when lots of whales are present. The fisheries may not open on time, but we're all working together to try and solve this problem. And hopefully we'll have a solution. So here's a gray whale that washed up in Fort Bragg. And the folks at the Noyo Center work with us, and they responded to it. This was in April of 2015. I'm sorry, May of 2015. So they could not do a necropsy on it because it was on a private beach, and the landowner did not want them to cut up the whale on their beach. But this whale is a very interesting case, because here you see where the tail fluke has been amputated. So more than likely, this is an amputated fluke based on that happened because of a previous entanglement issue. This case is also particularly interesting. So it's an adult female. She was 31 feet. And earlier in the year, in March, there had been a whale swimming. This is a still shot taken from a video from a whale watching boat. There had been a gray whale with an amputated fluke swimming off of the San Diego coast. And the boat, recorded her. Usually when whales swim, they use their flukes to propel them. So she would turn her body and basically use the stump to propel herself. So we looked at this image, and we looked at the shape of the amputation, and we compared it to the shape of the amputation of the animal several months later in Fort Bragg, and we were able to match them together. So she was alive a few months earlier. This is when they're making their migration back up to Alaska to feed for the summer. They don't have a lot of energy at that point because they feed in the summer in Alaska, and then in the fall and winter, they migrate down to Mexico, give birth, hang out in Mexico, and then for the winter, and then swim all the way back to Alaska. And they really do most of their feeding in the summers in Alaska. So it would be kind of like filling up your tank of gas in Alaska and going all the way to Mexico and back to Alaska before you get another tank of gas. And sometimes their tank runs out. And in this case, she had to work a lot harder because she didn't have a tail fluke. So we assume that her tank ran out. She ran out of energy, and that's why she washed up on the Mendocino coast. So here's a humpback just this past June. Humpback whales are also very frequently victims of entanglements. A lot of the disentanglement work that the disentanglement team does is with humpback whales, and it's really nice when they are able to free them. But in this case, this is a 31-foot juvenile female humpback whale that was in Point Reyes last summer. It was a difficult response because the tides were high and there was never a low tide. But one of my colleagues, Barbie Halaska at the Marine Mammal Center, an amazing biologist, was able to go out there, and she was able to document this entanglement and to remove the buoys so that they could be identified and the owners could be contacted and hopefully work to solve the problem. But you can see how that buoy wrapped around the fluke could cause an amputation. So this happened in June. We hadn't seen that many humpbacks with amputated flukes. And then a couple months later in September, up on the Mendocino coast, another humpback washed up, but it didn't have any fishing gear on it. This was another juvenile male, about 30 feet long. We have to estimate because it's missing the flukes. But it washed up on shore showing an amputated peduncle and fluke. It also showed injury along the back, like scraping along the back. You can see it nicely in this picture. So we suspected, because we had just seen it in June, that this was from an entanglement. But in order to really get a confirmation on that, we actually brought these images to the disentanglement folks, because they're the experts who work with animals who are entangled all the time. And we all had a big discussion about, could anything else have done this? Or is the only option really an entanglement? And we all agreed that the only thing that would cause this kind of damage along the back and then amputate the fluke is a previous entanglement. So this one was recorded as a probable entanglement as well. So we learn from every situation when we're out on the beaches. We have the evidence of the crab pots amputating a fluke, and then we see an amputated fluke, and that just helps us to figure out the mysteries that we're working on. So ships do have other issues with marine mammals, not just blunt force trauma, which is what we see mostly see in the large whales with the broken bones. Sometimes there are some obvious wounds on the external side of the animal. In this case, this is harbor porpoise, two harbor porpoises with propeller injuries. You can see where the propellers made their way through the body and then also amputated the flukes of this animal. Same thing here, you can see. So these are probably small craft propellers, so that's why it's really important that boats stay a safe distance away from marine mammals in the waters. Sometimes it's not possible. The animal just comes up, like in a ship whale collision. Often the whale is coming up. The ship, especially the large shipping container ships, they can't see it. They can't stop. It takes them like 12 miles to slow down and stop. And it's just an unfortunate timing situation. But humans in general, and especially in small craft, should keep their distance from live marine mammals in the bay. We have seen large propeller injuries on large whales. They don't happen very frequently, But here's an example of one. This is a gray whale. This is on Brooks Island, which is in the East Bay Regional Park area. And this is a presumed propeller injury, probably from a large ship. So you can see the cut, but it basically amputated the back end of this whale. This is an adult female gray whale. So that's a rare thing that we don't see very often. Sometimes things wash up and they're just too decomposed for us to be able to determine anything, like in this case. Very often carcasses will float at sea for quite a while before they come up on the beach. This is an adult female gray whale, 42 feet, but we could not determine any kind of cause of death because of the condition that it came up in. Unfortunately, sometimes they come up in pristine condition, but we're also not able to determine the cause of death. So this is a juvenile fin whale, 43 feet long, that washed up on Stinson Beach. And actually this whale, when it first came up on the beach, was still alive. So we're really lucky on the West Coast that we do not often have large whales that are still alive when they end up on the beaches. That problem happens a lot more frequently on the East Coast. I'm not sure if it has to do with the continental shelf out here or what, but it's really an unfortunate situation when a large whale strands alive. You can't push them back out into the water. It's not possible. They're probably sick, which is why they're there in the first place. But you don't want to see them suffer. So often researchers on the East Coast have to figure out how to humanely euthanize a large whale that's alive on their beach. And the folks at the Marine Mammal Center were contemplating that. This animal had just come up, it was still alive, but then it died very soon after landing on the beach. So they did not need to actually euthanize it. It was a very quick process. But we did a necropsy. We had a whole team of people out there. It was very, very fresh, but we couldn't find anything. And it's possible that if it was hit by a ship, the injuries were on the side, the right side of the animal, which is inaccessible to us. So some situations are frustrating because we just can't find an answer, and we want to know the answers. So some cases, the animal's totally inaccessible. It's in an unsafe location. We can't get to it. This is in Kavanaugh Gulch in Mendocino County. We could not get to it. The only way you could get to it was maybe by boat, but it was not a safe situation for responders to go out in. However, there was a local person who took their drone out and flew their drone over the whale, and they were able to get close enough to it that we were able to identify it as a humpback whale. You can see the distinctive humpback flipper here. And we were actually able to estimate the size of the animal based on the turkey vultures in the photo. So we know how big a turkey vulture is. You just take this turkey vulture and you lay turkey vultures, a whole line of turkey vultures out in your mind along the body, and that's how you determine, you can estimate the size. So at least we were able to collect important information. Even though we don't know why it died, we were able to gather those data, and all the data that we collect are entered into the National Marine Mammal Stranding Network database, so they're accessible for anyone to use. So we're going to shift gears just a little bit. In the past couple of years, we've been involved with an investigation into an unusual mortality event for gray whales here along the West Coast. So this is a situation, an unusual mortality event is defined as a stranding that's not expected, that involves a significant die-off of any marine mammal population, and it demands an immediate response. So beginning in January and February of 2019, researchers all along the coast from Mexico to Alaska noticed higher than usual numbers of dead gray whales along the coast. And so we alerted NOAA, we sent them the data, and in May of 2019, NOAA declared this an unusual mortality event. And by declaring it a UME, or unusual mortality event, that sets several gears in motion. So an investigative team was gathered together, and a UME working group team. Those are groups made up of scientific and academic folks, conservation organizations, state and federal agencies, and stranding network groups like us. So I'm serving as one of 3 California state representatives on the gray whale UME, the gray whale unusual mortality event. And the gray whale UME was declared because there was this large, higher than usual number of dead gray whale strandings along the coast, and that animals affected by this die-off were showing similar findings. So in this case, their general physical condition, their blubber thickness, their body condition was similar along the coast. And so that put them into this investigation. So we started the investigation in 2019. It is still ongoing. And here are some of the numbers. So in 2019, there was a total of 214 dead gray whales between Mexico and Alaska. So it's really interesting that this is a international investigation, and groups from all along the coast are working together on it. In 2020, there were fewer deaths, only 174 were documented. But keep in mind, the number of animals that actually strand on the coast is estimated to be only a small portion of the actual number of animals that are dying in any event like this. So far in 2021, knock on wood, there have only been 14 in Mexico, and 1 so far in the US and Washington. So this was very similar, these high numbers of die-offs in 2019 and 2020 to an unusual mortality event that happened in 1999 and 2000. So exactly 20 years earlier, during that period of time, those 2 years, there were 600 dead whales between Mexico and Alaska. And there was also a UME declared back then, and researchers worked on those whales to try and determine what was going on with the gray whales during that UME. And then now we're doing it again. So in California in 2019, we had 34 dead whales along the coast and 18 in 2020 in California. So the Marine Mammal Center and Cal Academy worked together in 2019. We, in our area, in the San Francisco Bay Area, had 14 dead gray whales. That's a lot for a short period of time. That was between March 2nd and May. So we were very, very busy in the spring of 2019. And you can see just a handful of them here. So of those 14 dead gray whales, we were able to determine that 7 of them showed signs of malnutrition. So they were in poor body condition. 4 of them had traumatic injuries consistent with ship strikes. 1 was a ship strike and malnutrition, and 2 of them we were not able to identify the cause of death. So we were able to examine most of the dead gray whales in 2019. Now in 2020, it was a little bit of a different story, right? Because COVID happened. We only had 6 dead gray whales in our area. So just like 99 and 2000, 1999, there were very high numbers of dead animals. And then in 2000, it was less. This UME did the same thing. In 2019, there was a high number of deaths. And then in 2020, it decreased some. So in the Bay Area, we responded to 6 between technically December 31st of 2019, but I counted as 2020 because most of the work was done on January 1st. And May of 2020, we had 1 trauma that was a suspected orca predation, 1 premature birth, which was the young animal in December of the last day of December 2019, and one possible malnutrition, but the rest were unknown. So because of COVID, we were not able to mount full necropsy responses due to human safety concerns. So we didn't get as much information in 2020 as we would have liked, but overall, preliminary findings in several of the whales have shown evidence of emaciation or malnutrition. And this has also been documented with photographs of the live whales down in Mexico, have looked in poor body condition compared to previous years. But these findings are not consistent, so they're not definitive, and more research still needs to be done on these gray whales. So in 2021, we will be responding as much as possible to the dead gray whales because the investigation is still ongoing. So this is a map of where gray whales have been seen in 2019 and 2020, where they've been stranded along the coast. You can see there are quite a few of them. And then the graph is a comparison between the 2019 and 2020 values, which are orange and green. 2021 is blue, they're not on here yet, although we have had 15. And then the black is the 18-year average. So this does not include the 99 and 2000 unusual mortality event, but you can see, I mean, the highest annual average was about 5, just as I mentioned earlier. And then in all those years, they're much higher. In all those months in 2019 and 2020 is much higher than the annual average for those months prior to that. And that's along the entire coast. So here is a comparison that includes the 1999 and the 2000 UME in blue, and then the 2019 and 2020 again in orange and green. And you can see it's a very similar pattern with very high numbers in the spring during their migration and then tapering off. So what does this mean for gray whales? Very, very recently, within the last couple of months, Southwest Fisheries Science Center released a publication on gray whale population estimates. So they estimate the population size based on whale counts that happen along the coast in several locations. There are researchers and volunteers that sit on the coast and count gray whales as they move, primarily moving south, but also during the northward migration as well. And based on those counts, they determined that the gray whale population has declined by 24% in the last, so there was a population survey that just came out saying the population is about 20,000 gray whales. And the previous population survey, which I believe came out in 2018, was 27,000 gray whales. So the gray whale population has declined 24% from 27,000 down to 20,000. And this is very similar to the decline that was documented in 1999 and 2000. So back then, the gray whale population had also been increasing prior to 1999, and then there was a 23% decline in the gray whale population during that unusual mortality event. But the population, as you can see, did rebound after the previous UME and got up to 27,000. So what this suggests is that these large fluctuations are not rare, but that the declines in abundance appear to represent short-term events, but they have not, as far as we know, resulted in any detectable long-term impacts on the population, because the population declined in 1999 and 2000 and then rebounded and then declined again. So what it does also tell us is it could be that the ocean can only support a certain number of gray whales, and maybe when they hit 27,000, that's the highest that it can go. But because the investigation is still ongoing, that's one possible solution. Malnutrition is another possible hypothesis, but then we have to look at disease characteristics too, because maybe there's a disease out there that we're missing. So that's why the data that we gather at the Academy with the Marine Mammal Center and other marine mammal stranding organizations are so useful for things like this investigation, for informing science and management in areas like the shipping lanes, and then like an investigation into a die-off like this. Sometimes, shifting gears again, sometimes we get some rare species that are important to archive in the collection. This is an adult male sperm whale that washed up in Pacifica in 2015. We do not know the cause of death, although the sperm whale teeth, if you cut them in half, you can count the layers like a tree, and this one was aged at something like 43 years old. So it's possible that it could have been an older sperm whale. It didn't show any other signs of injury. Baird's-beaked whale in 2003, a very rare species. We do not get very many of these. These are very deep water, very pelagic animals. They don't come close to shore very often. Prior to this, we only had 2 in the collection. So this one was an important specimen to archive. And then in 2016, a fourth one, so 2 plus 3 plus 1 plus this one is 4. Now we have 4 Baird's-beaked whales in our collection. And this one washed up in Point Reyes, also with an amputated tail fluke. The first Baird's-beaked whale in our collection is actually a really interesting story. It washed up in 1925 in Santa Cruz on Moores Beach, and it was actually referred to as the Santa Cruz sea monster at the time. As you can see, it's kind of a head with a long, what looks like a neck, basically when all of the muscle and things have degraded from a whale, it kind of forms a shroud. That's what this is. And people did not know what it is. However, scientists from the California Academy of Sciences went down and confirmed that no, this was not some sort of sea monster. It was actually a Baird's-beaked whale. So the Santa Cruz sea monster is in our collection at the museum. And then another important specimen and uncommon species that washed up on our coast is this orca from 2011. This is an offshore orca. You can see by its teeth, the teeth are very worn down to the gum line. This is a young animal, but these offshore orcas eat sharks, and sharks have skin that's like sandpaper, and so this guy's teeth were very worn down. Again, orcas are also identified in catalogs. We took pictures of his saddle patch and his dorsal fin. He was identified as 0319. Might have originally been identified in 2002 as a juvenile, so he was 12 to 15 years old when he died in 2011. And he had been last seen in September 2011 off of British Columbia before he washed up in Point Reyes National Seashore. And we did not know at the time of the necropsy what caused his death. However, when we articulated his skeleton for display at the museum, the answer was revealed to us. So we knew he had one broken rib, but in general, one broken rib does not indicate a ship strike or anything like that. But when we put that broken rib back together and put it on the skeleton, we could see that the vertebrae above that rib were stained pink from blood, and that the rib actually had 2 breaks in it. One break that had healed, and then another break that was probably the cause of death. So we assume, just like in bottlenose dolphins, orcas can interact with each other, sometimes in negative ways. Young orcas can kind of beat up on each other. So we assume that this young offshore orca was actually beat up by another orca, broke his rib, and punctured his lung, and that's probably how he died. We don't know for sure, but that's our hypothesis based on the data that we've collected from the skeleton and from the necropsy. So 0319 is now on permanent display at the museum. We have this orca, we have the blue whale, we have a gray whale, and we have a whole sea lion skull wall on display there. We've had several other exhibits in the past that focus on marine mammals. And we also currently have an exhibit called Giants of Land and Sea. So when the Academy is able to reopen, I encourage you all to visit the Giants of Land and Sea, visit 0319, one of my favorite skeletons hanging from the museum, and to learn more about marine mammals on the main floor of the museum. You can also help by being part of a community science effort to report whale sightings. You can report them through this Whale Alert app. The Marine Mammal Center Cetacean Field Research Team is also very happy to receive reports of any live whales that people see inside San Francisco Bay. You can take photos and email them to Cetacean Field Research at TMMC. And then also there's a platform called iNaturalist where you can take photos and upload them. I encourage you all to take pictures of any marine mammals you see and upload them to various places. So I just want to thank our funding source, NOAA Prescott Grant Program, for the many years of funding that has supported our marine mammal work and our large whale stranding work. As you can see, large whales take a lot of effort, and I'm grateful to all of these agencies and people that have helped over the years. And now I think we have some time for questions if there are any.
There are. Hi.
Great.
Yeah.
Sorry, I went so long.
Not at all. I was just going to thank you for giving us that much time. I know how hard it is to talk for that long, but that was fascinating. And I just dropped links for the Whale Alert app and for iNaturalist and the Marine Mammal Center and some other things you mentioned into comments. Yeah,
Let me exit the show.
Oh, okay. So you can actually see the disembodied voice talking to you. Hi.
Hi.
The work is just incredible. Like when you started talking about it and you were talking about a 45-foot whale, that sounded really daunting. And then there was suddenly like an almost 80-foot whale. And yeah, the scale of it is just so incredible to think about. Okay.
Well, and when you're like 45 feet after you've worked on an 85-foot whale or an 80-foot whale, a 45-foot whale seems really small.
Right.
And
it's like
much
an easy
easier.
Day.
You're like, oh my God, this one went so quickly and it was so easy. Like, so it's not even like double the size is double the work. It's just so much more massive.
Right. Yeah. And I didn't think about the fact that in some situations, like you really can't turn that whale over and you have to just kind of work as it's presented.
No, especially along the California coast, we rarely have large equipment that can come out and help. On the East Coast, the beaches are a lot more accessible for equipment. So especially for really important species like the North Atlantic right whale, which is a severely endangered species, they want to learn as much as they can about every single one that dies. So they are able to use heavy machinery like bulldozers and things to roll them over. But unfortunately, our coastline just does not allow that.
Right.
So it's all knives and hands, and every once in a while we'll use chainsaws, but that's not a delicate process.
Yeah, well, that just got really visceral.
Yes.
Well, our first question from Jake is actually about what happens when you do hit the beach. And he asks, is there a standardized order of work or priorities when you only have a few hours to get it done?
Yeah, so that's where having a collaboration with the Marine Mammal Center folks is really helpful. So their team kind of focuses on the soft tissues, all of the internal organs, and taking all of the samples for histology, looking at the stomach contents, collecting urine and feces, getting lung samples and heart samples. And then our team at the Academy, because we're kind of more bone focused, we start looking for those injuries, trying to really dig in to get to the vertebrae, to look at the ribs, to find the pelvic bones. And so we concentrate on the bones and they concentrate on the soft tissues. And it's really a great collaboration. Not many organizations have that many people with that many specialized skills that can work together. So we're really, really lucky to be able to partner with them.
Oh, that's really cool.
Yeah. Certain people are always assigned to certain things. Like I have one volunteer who he's the pelvic bone guy. Like, James, go get the pelvic bone. And then I have another one, Sean, go try and find the earplug. It's really hard to find those earplugs. I've never found one. I like to think it's because the whales we get are too decomposed, and so the wax has melted, but that might not be the case. We may just not be looking in the right place, or I know we're looking in the right place. We're just not finding them. So.
Yeah. What do you have? Do you have a specific? Are you like the something lady?
I'm like the
everything.
Tell everyone what to do lady, and then everyone's like, Mo, come here and look at this. So I don't often get to actually dig in. Early on in my career, I was climbing in there and the guts and everything with everybody else. But now that I'm kind of overseeing, we always have a safety person on every necropsy, in case somebody gets cut. Unfortunately, it doesn't happen very often, but we always have someone assigned to safety. We have someone who stays clean to take photographs and to collect data. And then if it's a very accessible place where the public shows up, we will often bring out docents, especially from the academy, who can then tell the public who are watching what's going on and give them updates and things. So
okay,
it really does take a village.
Yeah. So we had lots of questions in this area, basically from folks asking, so Terry and Helen and others, basically asking what happens to the carcass afterwards. I'll just read Laura's question, which is a little more complete. After your team finishes a necropsy, do you collect all the parts of the animals, or do you leave some of the body to decompose?
Yeah, so we can't collect everything because we don't have space to archive everything. And it is the policy, especially along the West Coast, to kind of let nature take its course after a carcass. It depends on the beach and where we are. It is technically the responsibility of the land manager to get rid of a carcass after we've taken the scientific data. In some cases that involves, like on Ocean Beach, they can get out heavy machinery and dig a big hole and roll the carcass into it. In Bolinas, that 80-foot blue whale was at Agate Beach, and Agate Beach is surrounded by Duxbury Reef, which is a reef of international significance. So there was no way that it was going to get towed out over the reef. You can't get any machinery down there for it to be buried. So it did naturally decompose on the beach. But we also worked in that case to remove parts, as many parts as we could, to donate to educational organizations. So it has to go through a specific permitting process in order for people to have marine mammal parts. But we worked with NOAA to get people legally to transfer those parts. And we were able to distribute parts to over 30 educational organizations from that one carcass. Yeah, so we do as much as we can. Because it's not great for people who live there to have to deal with a carcass for a while. But in some cases, they decompose and wash out fairly quickly. Sometimes bones hang around for a lot longer. So it just depends on where it is.
Okay, great. Thank you. Glendy was curious, how big is a gray whale's heart and how much does it weigh?
Oh, gosh. Well, I only deal with the bones.
Okay.
TMMC could probably deal with that. Well, I know a blue whale heart is the size of a VW beetle.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, big.
Yeah. Okay.
Big. Gray whale hearts are probably like this big.
All right, Glendy, that's as good as it's going to get. Hit Google if you want the details.
Exactly.
William asks, why do the orcas only eat the tongue of the gray whale?
Yeah, we have no idea why orcas only eat the tongue. There's some hypothesis that, they're just practicing maybe. And then there's some thoughts that the tongue is like a delicacy, but that does come up. I'm sure they actually eat more than that because,
Right.
you know, they have to feed, but in some cases we'll have young gray whales that only have damage to the front. So it's,
Oh, wow.
that is a question, you know, that's what's so wonderful about science. Like,
Yeah.
there's so many questions that, like, what, like with that offshore orca, right? He was a young animal. His teeth were worn down to the gum lines. He had like abscesses, which must have been painful. Like, how is that a good strategy? So,
Right.
you know, they eat sharks. Great. I'm sure sharks are very energetic, but if it's wearing down your teeth, how is that a good strategy? So, like,
Right.
every time I go out to the beach and work on an animal, more scientific questions come up. And like, that's the exciting part of science.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. Okay. So this question is from Kevin, but a lot of people ask this one as well. Is there a way to get training and join your response team?
So we do take volunteers. We generally like to have folks that have a scientific background. Excuse me. Unfortunately, right now with COVID, we're not allowed to use volunteers.
Right.
But if you're interested and you have time and you don't mind being called out at the last minute and dealing with blood and gore and getting completely stinky, I encourage you to check out the Cal Academy website, the volunteer section. Maybe start an application in hopes that at some point we'll all be able to work together again. When everybody's vaccinated, we can all gather around a carcass. But yeah, I encourage anyone who's really interested and to go ahead and contact us. Yeah,
that sounds great. And I guess even if you are not wanting to like wade into the viscera, there are docent applications there too. So when we reopen, if you'd like to be one of the explainers. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that's an important part of it.
Yeah. This question is from Maya, and I think you kind of started to talk about this at the end, but she, in terms of breaking down the different kinds of causes of death that you were able to identify, she asks, what percentage of the deaths you see annually are human caused?
We should look at those data. I mean, we could download the data, and I'm sure someone has looked at that. In fact, there was just a paper that came out yesterday. This is not going to be specifically that answer, but it is about gray whales. I haven't read it yet. I just downloaded it this morning, but the summary was that gray whales are, a higher percentage of them are hit by ships than other whales. And that's specifically happening more up in the northern Pacific near Russia, where there's an endangered population of gray whales. Excuse me, there's only like 20 of them there. Oh, wow. So we could look at the data, and NOAA actually probably has those data to actually get the percentages, but just off of like what we see when we're out there and how my perception of it, which is of course not scientific, but I would say it's probably 30 to 40% are human interactions. If we're talking entanglements and ship collisions, but you know, then you have the unknowns and the orca predations and the malnutrition. So yeah, I would say it's about 30 to 40%, but the data would tell the real story. Yeah,
and I guess even with things like the malnutrition or things that aren't fully understood, like that could still be human caused on some level if it was a question of
if
like
it's global
fish. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So just last question. I know you can probably like barely talk at this point. And I think you gave people some resources at the end in terms of iNaturalist and the whale app and these things, but Michelle and others ask what the public can do to help protect whales off California.
Yeah, I think any encouragement you can give to government agencies that are working on trying to solve issues like the crab fisheries, trying to change the fishing gear. You know, if something comes up for public comment, definitely comment. You can support all the organizations that are doing this work, either monetarily or with your time. You can report sightings and become a community scientist. I think those are the best ways.
Okay, that's a great suite of tools. Okay, I'll release you back into the wild, but I was going to tell viewers that if you come back tonight at 7 p.m. Pacific for our night school show, tonight's episode is about California grizzlies, and it's going to be awesome. And Moe is actually coming back to talk to viewers that time about Monarch, who some of you may know as the very famous California grizzly, who was the model for the California state flag. And it sounds like you you're actually like showing people some of these endangered species skulls. And then I think Monarch himself, is that right?
Yes, Monarch makes a cameo appearance tonight.
That is a treat.
We have some extinct grizzly bear parts in the collection that I share as well. So plus tons of there's going to be tons of information from other speakers as well about the history of California grizzlies and different studies that have happened. So yeah, come back and then come back for our tour of the collection sometime in March.
March 25th, I think Mo will be back to take us into the scientific collections at the California Academy of Sciences, and we will take a look at the antler room. Right.
Yes, and then I'm also doing a night school about the gray whale. Unusual mortality events specifically with a bunch of other researchers also sometime in March. So lots of good bird and mammal stuff.
I think it's the same day because we always double book you for that. Yeah, you're elusive. All right. Thank you, Mo. Thank you, viewers. We'll see you at 7 p.m. tonight Pacific time, and take care until then. Bye.
Bye-bye.